Snow fell like drifting lace through the open church doors, soft as breath and slow as shame. The wind carried it inward, brushing the hem of Helen Whitmore's wedding dress where she sat alone on the front pew, hands trembling around a bouquet of frozen roses. The candles flickered in their sconces, smoke curling upward like whispered gossip. Wooden pews creaked with the shifting weight of townsfolk too polite to stare, and too hungry not to. Her veil, once a symbol of promise, fluttered faintly with each draft that swept across the aisle. Outside, a horse whinnied somewhere beyond the steeple's bell. Inside, silence spread heavy and mean. The preacher, Elias Boone, cleared his throat once, then again, but found no words. His hand hovered over his Bible, then fell away. The groom was gone, vanished with the dawn before vows could even be spoken. And though everyone had seen the empty hitching post, no one dared move first. Mary Ellen Hart, wrapped in her fox stole like judgment itself, leaned toward her neighbor. "I told you, didn't I?" she whispered. "No good comes from rushing a wedding, especially when a girl's got no kin to vouch for her." The other women murmured assent, their pearls of sympathy strung on threads of disdain. Helen heard every word, though she kept her eyes fixed on the altar. Beneath the lace gloves, her fingers ached from how tightly she gripped the bouquet. Red petals, edged in frost, trembled like small, dying hearts. She had waited for the sound of boots, his boots, to echo down the aisle. She had imagined him breathless, smiling, some story about a broken wheel or a frightened horse. But the minutes had stretched thin, then cruel, until the truth sat beside her like an unwelcome ghost. Elias shifted uncomfortably. "Miss Whitmore," he said gently, his voice the crack of mercy in the cold. "Perhaps we should dismiss the gathering. You can rest a while." Helen rose on unsteady legs. The whisper followed her like smoke. He left her. Ran before the vows. Imagine the shame. She could feel their eyes like coals pressed to her skin. She wanted to vanish, to dissolve into the drifting snow. But her boots carried her down the aisle, past the wilted flowers, past the untouched wedding cake that glistened under candlelight like mockery itself. Outside, the air struck cold and clean against her face. The world was white and endless. The snow came harder now, swallowing tracks before they formed. Behind her, the church doors creaked closed, muffling the last echoes of pity. She took 3 steps down the porch before her knees faltered. The bouquet slipped from her hands and fell into the snow, roses breaking apart on impact. For a moment she thought she might cry, but the tears would not come. Her heart had already turned to something colder than the wind. She pressed a hand to her chest as if to steady the emptiness. A wagon rattled past on the road, the driver staring openly before urging his mules faster. She could almost hear the words forming in town already. Poor thing. Deserted at the altar. A bride with no groom and no family. Maybe she earned it. A figure moved through the snow near the hitching posts. A horse, dark against the white, snorted and shook frost from its mane. The man who dismounted did so with quiet control, his movements slow, deliberate, unhurried by curiosity or cruelty. He was tall, broad in the shoulders, his black coat dusted in flakes. Long dark hair, damp from the storm, clung to the line of his jaw. He removed his hat as he approached, revealing the angular grace of his face and the proud calm in his eyes. The air changed around him. Townsfolk lingering near the church steps fell still. Someone muttered, "Apache." The word hung sharp as a blade. He ignored them, gaze steady, boots crunching against the snow. When he stopped before her, the wind seemed to bow. "You'll freeze," he said quietly. His voice carried a low strength, like something carved from stone and patience. Helen blinked at him, startled. Her lips parted, but no sound came. She felt the heat rise to her cheeks, embarrassment, confusion, the sting of being seen. He looked not at her tears, nor her torn veil, but at the shivering woman beneath all that ruin. "I'm all right," she managed. The lie trembled, as fragile as her posture. He glanced toward the church, toward the narrow faces pressed against the frosted glass. "They're waiting to see you fall," he murmured. She swallowed. "Let them." His gaze lingered. Then he leaned closer, close enough that his breath misted between them. Act like you're mine. The words stopped the wind. She stared at him, caught between disbelief and something dangerously like hope. What? He straightened, his tone still soft but firm enough to silence the onlookers. You stand alone. They'll call it your fault. But if you walk away with someone, they'll stop before they speak. She shook her head slightly, veil shifting against her cheek. You don't even know me. He gave a faint smile, the kind that carried no mockery. Don't have to. I know what it is to be stared at. A hush rippled across the steps. Even Mary Ellen faltered. The sight of a proud Apache standing beside a broken settler bride was enough to still every tongue. Helen's breath came uneven. The logic was simple, almost absurd, yet something in his tone, its calm defiance, felt like rescue. She hesitated only a moment longer before lifting her chin. Then I suppose I'm yours for the walk home. He nodded once, offering his hand. She took it. His palm was warm, calloused, steady as bedrock. Together they descended the steps while whispers rose like the hiss of a dying fire. Her dress dragged through the snow, gathering frost. He moved beside her with quiet command, neither guiding nor pulling, merely existing as a wall between her and their cruelty. At the bottom of the hill, where the church lamps blurred into the white distance, she turned slightly toward him. Thank you, she said, her voice barely above the storm. He looked ahead, the line of his jaw tightening. Don't thank me yet. They reached his horse. The animal snorted, pawing the snow, muscles shivering beneath the saddle blanket. He lifted her easily, his strength gentle, as though she were made of spun glass. Then he mounted behind her, cloak billowing like a shadow merging with her white dress. The town fell away behind them, rooftops shrinking, the church bell tolling once, hollow and mournful. Helen looked back only once, watching her bouquet vanish beneath the snow, a red smudge swallowed by white. She turned forward again, feeling the warmth of his chest against her back, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them. The storm thickened, obscuring the road, but he guided them with unerring calm. After a while, she found her voice. Why did you help me? He kept his eyes on the horizon. Didn't like the way they looked at you. Same way they look at me. The words settled between them, simple and true. She thought of the stares, the whispers, the way pity can cut deeper than cruelty. She thought of how he'd said act like you're mine not as command, but as protection. The rhythm of hooves became a heartbeat against the hush of snow. Time softened around them. When they reached the edge of the pines, the wind eased. The cabin lights ahead glowed faint through the storm, a solitary warmth in a cold world. He dismounted, offered his hand again. She hesitated only briefly before taking it. The snow glittered in her hair like starlight. The fire from the cabin windows flickered across his face, revealing eyes not of danger, but of deep, enduring quiet. For the first time since the morning, her lungs filled without trembling. The ache in her chest eased, if only a little. She realized, with a strange calm, that she was no longer waiting for a man who'd left her, but standing beside one who hadn't. The horse snorted softly. Somewhere far behind, the town bells tolled once more, muffled by distance and snow. He opened the cabin door, the warmth spilling out across the porch, the smell of pine and smoke reaching her like memory. She hesitated at the threshold, half afraid to step from humiliation into safety. He turned, holding the door wide. You can rest here. Just till the storm passes. Her fingers lingered on the frame. And after that? He met her gaze, unreadable but kind. After that's your choice. The snow hissed against the roof. Inside, the fire popped softly. She took one step forward, crossing from the cold into the glow. Behind her, the door closed with the hush of finality. Outside, the world was white and endless. Inside, two strangers began to thaw. And in that quiet moment, Helen Whitmore, once a bride abandoned, felt the first uncertain flicker of something far more dangerous than heartbreak. Hope. The cabin was warm, but the warmth felt borrowed, like standing too close to a stranger's fire. Helen sat near the hearth, her white dress spread around her like fallen snow melting too slowly to disappear. The flames painted her face in gold and shadow, softening the bruise of humiliation still fresh on her heart. The man called Talon moved quietly behind her, stacking wood, his presence filling the small space without demanding it. He hadn't asked her name, nor told her his. The silence between them was not awkward. It was careful, like both feared breaking something fragile. Outside, the wind howled against the log walls, shaking the shutters, but inside the air hummed with uneasy peace. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and calm, as though he feared startling the storm itself. "There's stew by the stove." She nodded but didn't move. The firelight caught on the sleeve of his coat as he ladled the food into a tin bowl. His movements were slow, deliberate, the kind of quiet strength that made her realize he'd lived too long without needing to impress anyone. He placed the bowl near her feet and retreated to the opposite side of the room. The smell of venison and herbs made her stomach tighten, but pride kept her still. He noticed. "You should eat," he said, not unkindly. She looked up at him then. "You don't have to pity me." "I don't," he said. "If I did, I'd have left you where they stared." That answer cut through her pride like a clean wind through frost. She lifted the spoon, took one trembling mouthful, and felt heat rise in her chest. Real heat, the kind that reminded her she was still alive. He didn't watch her eat. Instead, he sat near the window, sharpening a small knife on a whetstone, the scrape steady and rhythmic. "Why did you do it?" she asked softly. "Back there at the church." He paused. "Didn't like how they looked at you." "I've seen that look all my life." She studied him through the shimmer of firelight. The planes of his face caught the glow in streaks of amber and shadow, his eyes steady but unreadable. "They'll talk worse now," she said. "A white woman with an Apache." "I don't lose sleep over gossip," he replied. "But you might." Her lips parted as though to answer, then closed again. She looked down at the fire, at the flicker of orange reflected in her tears. "Maybe I deserve it," she whispered. He turned toward her, the motion slow, measured. "No one deserves cruelty dressed as righteousness." The words landed between them, quiet as prayer. For a long time, the only sound was the fire popping, and the wind sighing against the walls. When the stew was gone, she rose to help with the dishes, but he stopped her. "You've had enough hurt for one day. Rest." "I can't just sit here," she murmured. "Feels wrong not to be useful." He gave a faint, understanding nod. "Then stoke the fire. Keep it breathing." So she did. She knelt near the hearth, adding logs, watching the sparks leap and fade. The rhythm steadied her hands, quieted her thoughts. She felt his gaze on her, not in hunger, not in pity, but in some gentler recognition that made her heartbeat stumble. Hours passed that way. The snow thickened outside, drumming softly against the roof. When she began to shiver, he took his wool blanket from the chair and set it gently over her shoulders. His fingers brushed her collarbone, only for an instant, but the warmth lingered longer than it should have. "Thank you," she said, without looking up. He didn't answer, only added another log to the fire. The flames rose higher, painting the room in amber light. Later, when fatigue dulled her senses, she dared to ask, "Do you live alone here?" "Yes." "No family?" He hesitated. "Had one once. The war took half. The rest walked away." She turned, the blanket sliding from her shoulder. "I'm sorry." He gave a faint shrug. "Don't be. Loss teaches a man how to listen." The phrase stayed with her. She wanted to ask what he meant, but his gaze was fixed on the window, where snow fell against the glass like ash. The quiet wrapped them both again, intimate in its stillness. When he finally spoke, it was as if he plucked the thought from her heart. "You can stay until the storm breaks. Then you go where you wish." She looked into the fire. "And if there's nowhere to go?" He met her eyes. "Then you stay until there is." That night, she dreamed of laughter echoing in empty churches, of hands that never reached for her. When she woke, the cabin smelled of coffee and pine. Talon was outside splitting wood, the axe rising and falling with clean precision. She watched from the window, the sight stirring something wordless in her. Not attraction, not yet, just the shock of witnessing gentleness carved into strength. When he returned, dusted with snow, she had already laid the table. He paused at the door, surprised. Didn't have to do that. I wanted to, she said. To feel like I belonged somewhere, even for a meal. He nodded once, sitting opposite her. They ate quietly. When she spilled a little coffee on the table, she started to apologize, but he wiped it away with his sleeve. Doesn't matter. The simplicity of it broke something open inside her. She realized she'd spent most of her life apologizing for existing. As evening came, she found an old violin hanging on the wall. The strings were warped, but the wood was still alive with memory. Does it play? She asked. Try, he said. She tuned it by instinct, her fingers remembering old habits learned from her mother before illness took her. When she drew the bow, a thin note trembled through the room. The second note followed, then a melody, soft, hesitant, tender as new snow. Talon sat still, head bowed slightly, eyes closed. The sound filled the cabin with something like forgiveness. For the first time, Helen didn't feel abandoned. She felt heard. When the last note faded, he looked at her. Not smiling, not speaking, just seeing. The air between them was full of words neither dared give shape. He stood and tended the fire again, the flames catching brighter, as if responding to the song. You play like someone who's lost too much, he said. She lowered the bow. And you look like someone who's learned how to survive it. The line hung in the air, sharp, honest, human. Then the wind shifted outside, carrying the faint sound of hooves in the distance. Talon's head turned. His expression changed, alert, wary. They don't ride this way in storms, he said quietly. She rose, heart quickening. Who? He didn't answer, only reached for the rifle by the door, the fire's glow gleaming against the metal barrel. Outside, through the white blur of falling snow, two dark shapes moved slowly toward the cabin. Helen's hand tightened around the violin's neck. The fire cracked behind them. And in that moment, she realized the warmth she'd begun to trust might soon be tested by the cold she thought she'd left behind. The storm passed, leaving the world hushed beneath layers of clean snow. The cabin roof glistened in morning light, its smoke rising in slow ribbons toward a pale blue sky. For the first time in weeks, Helen woke to stillness. Not fear, not pity, only the quiet rhythm of life returning. She dressed in a plain cotton gown she'd found folded in a chest, the hem brushing her bare ankles. The wedding dress lay packed away in a small wooden box, as though sealing off another life. Talon was already outside, his breath misting in the cold air, splitting wood with steady rhythm. His body moved like part of the land, each swing measured, each exhale syncing with the sound of axe against pine. Helen watched from the window for a moment before stepping out, pulling his blanket over her shoulders. You work before the sun even warms, she said softly. He glanced up, sweat and frost mingling at his temple. Fire doesn't care what hour it is. It only needs tending. She smiled faintly. You speak like the land taught you things men forget. He leaned the axe against the stump. It did. Her gaze drifted toward the valley, where the distant town lay small and self-righteous against the horizon. The church steeple rose like a finger pointing heavenward, though she suspected heaven had little patience for those who prayed with sharp tongues. I wonder what they're saying now, she murmured. He followed her line of sight. They talk because their world's small. You gave them something to fill it. I gave them nothing, she said, bitterness soft but deep. They took it. He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded once. Then take it back. She turned that over in her mind as they went about the morning's work. The air was crisp, the snow crunching beneath their boots. The cabin had become something of a rhythm, a shared silence punctuated by small mercies. His quiet presence at dawn, her laughter at the firelight when the kettle hissed over. Neither named what grew between them. It didn't need naming. But peace, she knew, never lasted long where gossip was currency. By midday, a rider appeared at the edge of the woods. The sheriff's horse, a speckled bay, its hooves biting into frozen ground. Talon paused his work, jaw tightening. Marshal Burke, he said, under his breath. The man approached with a wary hand on his hat. Morning, Talon. Miss Whitmore. His tone carried the forced politeness of someone walking through glass. Heard you been keeping company up here. Helen folded her arms. If you came for gossip, Marshall, the town's full of it. You won't find more here. He shifted uncomfortably. Wasn't my idea. Folks talk. The preacher sent me to check you were safe. Safe from what? Talon asked, voice steady but laced with iron. The marshal hesitated. From trouble that don't belong to you. Helen stepped forward, the cold biting her cheeks red. You mean safe from the man who left me to be humiliated, or from the one who carried me through the storm? He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Behind him, the wind stirred loose snow from the branches. Tell them, she said, her voice low but sure. Tell them I'm fine. Tell them I don't need saving. And if that don't quiet them, tell them I'm no longer theirs to talk about. The marshal studied her for a moment, then tipped his hat. You've changed, Miss Whitmore. I had to, she replied. He gave Talon a brief nod before riding off, his silhouette swallowed by white light. When he was gone, Talon said quietly, That'll stir them worse. She sighed. Let them stir. Maybe this time they'll choke on it. Days turned to weeks. The snow began to melt, revealing brown earth and early shoots of green. Helen hung washed clothes in the pale sun, while Talon mended the fence. The world felt almost forgiving. Yet beneath it, tension pulsed like a buried current. The town couldn't leave her alone. Each trip to the general store brought cold glances and colder silence. Whispers chased her like shadows. She began walking taller in spite of them, her chin lifted, her eyes forward. One afternoon, she found Mary Ellen Hart waiting near the barrels of flour. The older woman's lips curled with something halfway between pity and poison. Well, she said sweetly, look who decided to come down from her mountain. Thought we'd lost you to savagery. Helen kept her composure. You can't lose what was never yours. Mary Ellen's smile faltered. You used to be respectable. I used to believe respect came from others, Helen said. Now I know better. The woman's face tightened, but Helen didn't wait for a reply. She left her coins on the counter and walked out into the sunlight. Each step felt like reclaiming a piece of herself she'd been told to hide. When she returned to the cabin, Talon was whittling a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. You walked back slow, he said, eyes flicking toward her. I needed to, she replied. It feels different, walking into something you've chosen. He looked up at that, really looked. You think staying here is choosing? I do. She paused, meeting his gaze. And you? He set the carving aside. I stopped believing in choosing long ago. I only do what's right when it stands in front of me. And was I right? She asked quietly. He hesitated. You were hurt. That's not an answer. His jaw flexed, then softened. Then yes. You were right. For a heartbeat, silence expanded between them, warm and fragile. The kind that dared to hope. But it didn't last. That evening, hoofbeats thundered down the path again, this time more than one horse. Talon rose instantly, eyes narrowing. Through the window, Helen saw 3 figures dismounting near the gate. The leader's stance was unmistakable. Her former groom. The world tilted slightly, her stomach hollowing. His voice reached her before his face did. Helen, you've made quite the name for yourself. She froze as Talon stepped forward, rifle at his side but not raised. You've got no reason to be here, he said evenly. The man laughed, mean and brittle. Got every reason. That woman's my betrothed. She ran off with you, imagine what that looks like. Helen found her voice. I didn't run. You fled. He sneered. And you think hiding with a savage makes you pure again? The insult cracked through the air like a whip. Talon's shoulders tensed, but he didn't move. His calm was scarier than anger. Helen stepped between them before the moment could break. You left me in front of God and everyone, she said, her voice low but carrying. And he, she gestured toward Talon, found me when no one else would. The man spat in the snow. You'll regret this. The town already calls you ruined. Her hand trembled, but her eyes didn't waver. If decency means kneeling to men like you, then let me be ruined forever." The man's face darkened, but before he could speak, the marshal's voice rang from the trees. "Enough!" He emerged from the shadows on horseback, rifle drawn but lowered. "You're not taking her anywhere," he said. The groom scoffed. "She's my fiancée." "Not anymore," the marshal said. Word spread. "Preacher tore up the license last month." The man swore, glancing between them. "This isn't over." "It is for tonight," Talon said, stepping forward. His presence was steady, immovable, like the mountain behind him. The men mounted their horses, retreating into the dusk, curses lost in the wind. When the last sound faded, Helen let out a long breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She turned to Talon. "They'll come again." He nodded. "Maybe. But you won't stand alone this time." She looked at him, her eyes glistening. "And if standing beside you makes me an outcast?" He met her gaze, voice quiet but unshakable. "Then you'll belong to the right kind of people." She smiled faintly, tears slipping free. "I think I already do." The wind rose again, stirring the snow into small ghosts around their feet. In the distance the church bell tolled once, low and hollow, as if mourning something that had already begun to die. The town's hold over her. But the sound carried a warning, too, a reminder that peace is never granted without a price. Helen turned toward the darkening horizon, her heart steady, but her pulse alive with unease. The fire inside the cabin flickered against the windowpane, its glow fragile against the growing night. And somewhere beyond the ridge, the echo of hooves began again. Slower this time, deliberate, as if someone was coming not to argue, but to finish what had been started. The blizzard came at dusk, sudden and savage, as though the sky itself had remembered an old anger. Wind clawed through the pines, scattering snow in thick white veils that erased the world beyond the cabin door. Inside, the fire raged, its light trembling over Helen's pale face as she fastened the shutters. The storm moaned in the eaves like something alive. Talon stood by the window, rifle in hand, his expression carved in stillness. "They'll come tonight," he said, not turning. Helen's heart stilled. "In this weather?" He nodded once. "Men like him don't wait for clear skies when they're burning with pride." Lightning flared outside, quick and silent, followed by the low growl of thunder rolling over the mountains. Helen drew the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You should leave then. Go into the woods. They won't find you in this storm." He looked at her finally, eyes dark as the night beyond. "And leave you to face them alone?" "I've been alone before," she whispered. "Not like this." The words settled between them, heavier than the storm. He set the rifle on the table, its barrel gleaming in the firelight, and stepped closer. "If I fall tonight, remember." "Don't." Her voice trembled. "Don't talk like that." He stopped a breath away. The fire cast orange halos in her eyes. "Then remember this at least," he said softly. "No one leaves a man's soul untouched and lives inside it without changing it." Before she could answer, the sound came. Hooves, muffled but distinct, trudging through snow. 3, maybe 4 riders. Then the sharp metallic knock of a rifle, but against the cabin door. "Come out, Greyhawk." The voice was coarse and slurred. Her former groom. "Bring the whore with you." Talon's shoulders stiffened. Helen's breath caught like a thread about to snap. He spoke low, calm, controlled. "Stay by the fire." "No," she said, shaking her head. "Not again. Not while someone else fights for me." He gave her a long look, something between warning and admiration. Then he moved to the door, unbolting it just enough to see the shapes beyond. Wind and snow burst inward like ghosts. The men loomed in the storm's blur, faces hidden under wet hats, guns glinting faintly. "Step aside," their leader snarled. "She's coming home." "She already is," Talon replied, his tone quiet as falling ash. The man laughed, a hard, brittle sound. "You think you can take what's mine? You think the law's on your side?" "No law protects a coward," Talon said. "Only snow will bury you fair." A shot cracked through the wind. Wood splintered beside his head. Helen screamed, ducking as sparks showered from the hearth. Talon slammed the door shut, bar latch clanging down. "They'll try to smoke us out," he said. "Then we fight," she answered, surprising herself. Her voice was no longer small. He turned to her, disbelief flickering through the calm. "You've never held a gun." "Then show me." He hesitated only a moment before handing her a small revolver from the drawer. His fingers brushed hers, steadying her grip. "Breathe slow," he said. "Fear makes hands shake. Purpose keeps them still." Outside, voices shouted through the storm, taunts half swallowed by the wind. Shadows moved beyond the window, dark blurs circling like wolves. The fire popped, spitting sparks. Then came the crash, glass shattering, snow and cold exploding into the room. A man's arm reached through the broken window, gun aimed. Talon fired once. The sound was thunder inside the small cabin. The arm vanished. Silence, then chaos. Boots thudded on the porch. Another window broke. Helen crouched low, heart pounding, gun clutched to her chest. Talon moved with a predator's grace, reloading fast, his expression unreadable but alive with focus. When one of the men forced the door open, snow sweeping in, Helen fired without thinking. The recoil jolted her shoulder, smoke curling up her arm. The man stumbled back, howling, clutching his hand. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, shocked not by violence, but by her own steadiness. "Good," Talon said, already at the door. "Don't hesitate when truth's on your side." The storm swallowed the fight that followed. Muzzles flared like fleeting stars. The wind screamed louder, drowning out the curses and gunfire until everything became motion and instinct. Flashes of light, heavy breaths, the smell of smoke and snow. When it ended, the night was still again. One man fled into the trees, his tracks already vanishing beneath the falling snow. Another lay face down near the fence. Helen stood trembling near the hearth, the revolver heavy in her grip. Talon leaned against the wall, blood seeping through his sleeve, his breathing shallow. "It's done," he murmured. She rushed to him, pressing a hand against the wound. "You're bleeding, God, you're bleeding." "It's nothing," he said, though his voice faltered. "You did well." Her throat tightened. "I wasn't brave. I was terrified." "Bravery's not the lack of fear," he whispered. "It's walking through it anyway." She tore a strip from the old wedding veil she had kept folded in her chest, and pressed it against his arm. The lace bloomed red beneath her fingers. "It was supposed to mean belonging," she said bitterly. "Now it only binds wounds." He caught her wrist, his grip gentle despite the pain. "No," he said softly. "It still means belonging. Just to something truer." Outside, the wind began to die. The storm's rage ebbed to a whisper. Snowflakes drifted lazily through the broken glass, landing on the fire's edge and vanishing in small hisses of steam. Helen met his gaze, steady, unflinching. "You risked everything for me." He shook his head. "I stood where I should have. You're the one who changed the ending." She looked down at their joined hands. "Then let's change it again." He frowned faintly. "How?" "By not running anymore," she said. "By standing still, together." He was silent for a long time, the firelight softening the hard lines of his face. Then he rose slowly, wincing, and stepped into the center of the room. Snow whirled faintly through the open door behind him, settling on the floor like white petals. "No preacher," he said. "No ring." "No need," she whispered. He extended his hand, palm open. "Then say it." She placed her hand in his. "By storm or calm, by silence or song, I stay." His fingers closed around hers, steady and warm. "Then I stay too." The fire burned low. Outside, dawn broke pale and gold through the thinning clouds. The snow glittered untouched, except for two sets of footprints that led nowhere and everywhere all at once. She stepped beside him to the doorway, their shoulders brushing. The valley stretched below, still asleep beneath frost. Smoke rose faintly from the town, a reminder of the world that had once judged her. It looked small now, distant, harmless. He spoke quietly. They'll talk again. Let them, she said. We'll give them a better story. He turned to her then, and for the first time his calm broke into something softer. Helen Whitmore, he said, almost reverent, you carry more fire than this hearth ever could. She smiled, tears catching light. Then keep tending it. He leaned close, their foreheads touching, breath mingling in the cold air. The storm outside faded into silence, the last snowflake settling like a blessing. In that fragile stillness, where fear and forgiveness met, she felt something shift deep within her, quiet and absolute. Not salvation. Not victory. Something simpler, stronger. Home. And as the wind sighed its last breath across the valley, the world seemed to kneel before the vow they had made. Two souls standing against the cold, unafraid at last of being seen.